Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a review of what will very likely be one of the more divisive and controversial albums of 2022, because today we are talking about Timewave Zero, highly anticipated new album from cosmic death metal titans Blood Incantation, except this time around we're emphasizing the cosmic as opposed to the death metal. Because, minor spoiler alert, there's no death metal to speak of whatsoever on this brand new studio album. After having spent nearly a decade as a primary figure within the realms of modern death metal, arguably a poster boy for the genre, after having released classic records like Starspawn, Hidden History of the Human Race, and after having inspired a few memes thanks to the album artwork of the latter, Blood Incantation have decided they are going full-blown ambient, electronic, synthwave, whatever the fuck you want to call it. No longer are we being strapped to the back of a rocket hurtled through time and space itself. Instead, we are gently floating amongst the cosmos with Timewave Zero. As the band writes here in a press release epitomizing their cosmic essence and experimental nature, this new recording reveals an alternate dimension for experiencing the mind-bending songwriting of Blood Incantation's dense and otherworldly sonic landscapes beyond the limitations of genre and free to travel amongst the stars. In this exact same press release, Blood Incantation goes on to cite direct influence from Tangerine Dream, Pink Floyd, Lustmore, Dead Can Dance, and many more from across the realms of psychedelic, experimental, and ambient music. Going on to say that these influences and many more are synthesized in an archaic planetarium soundtrack, taking the listener on a cinematic journey through the Stargate into the vast darkness of outer space and beyond the infinite transcendental luminosity of the mind's eye. So far, the response to Timewave Zero has been pretty not great. When I placed this in my top 10 albums of 2022 video, a lot of people seemed confused at best and irritated at worst. I've spoken to a lot of fans who just don't want to give this album the time of day because it's not a death metal album and apparently just not worth their time because of that. And as far as the critics are concerned, there's not really much of a consensus whatsoever on where this album stands. Sure, the fine folk at Exclaim, Decibel Magazine, and Sputnik Music appear to like this record, but the fine folk at AV Club, Angry Metal Guy, and Kerrang! Magazine, not so much. But what about us fine folk here at Metal Meltdown HQ? What do we think of this latest chapter in Blood Incantation's ongoing musical journey and story? What do Anna, Chompy, and myself have to contribute to the conversation? Well, after multiple dedicated listens, I feel very comfortable telling each and every one of you that Timewave Zero is 100% okay. Yeah, I imagine that probably sounds a little bit anticlimactic. I imagine a lot of you expected me to either love this with all of my heart or hate it with every fiber of my being, but you know, in reality, I don't really have any strong feelings for this record one way or the other. I thought it was a pretty decent ambient album. I think Blood Incantation succeeded mostly at what they wanted to do with this album. Are there things I would change, edit, alter? Sure, but ultimately, Timewave Zero, not really worth getting that upset about. There are 2 songs on the standard edition of Timewave Zero, the first of which clocks in at almost exactly 21 minutes long, while the second clocks in at 19 minutes and 40 seconds long, making for roughly a 41-42 minute display of spacey, sci-fi, interstellar, ambient soundscapes. Everything across both tracks moves at a very languid and leisurely pace. There's a lot of repetition, subtle shifts, and emphasis on very stark minimalism, keyboard synthesizers. Some acoustic guitar parts can be heard popping up here and there, providing some extra color and contrast. But for the most part, this really does feel like you are just drifting through the endless void of space. I am reminded less of bands who have previously informed Blood Incantation's sound and identity, like Morbid Angel and Gorguts, and reminded more of Star Trek Enterprise ASMR videos and select cuts from Carl Sagan's The Music of Cosmos. It's interesting that Blood Incantation would call this a planetarium soundtrack, because that is ultimately what this kind of feels like. I feel like I should be sitting in a planetarium listening to this, or perhaps out stargazing, or at the very least not in the midst of a fucking circle pit. This is a very laid-back album, and as such requires a very laid-back environment. Whereas with other albums I talk about on the Metal Meltdown, I am usually intensely working out, or running errands, or just gallivanting across Toronto in general for God knows whatever reason. With this particular album, I made sure each time I listened to it that I was in a very laid-back environment so I could take as much from this album as possible. In fact, on my second playthrough, I turned down the lights as low as possible and just had a shit ton of edibles while playing Pokemon Legends Arceus. And it made for a genuinely really cool experience. I was thoroughly interested in a lot of what was happening. I do think that sometimes it drones on a bit much for its own good. I do think that the keyboards, the synthesizers are a little bit too inherently repetitive for their own good. But to be fair, this does occasionally work to the album's benefit. It does create this very hypnotic kind of feeling and vibe that just kind of keeps you glued to your couch and paying as much attention to the music as possible. It could do with being more versatile and dynamic, but it doesn't need to, because it still works. It still does exactly what Blood Incantation wants Timewave Zero to do. The fact that this is all recorded on analog tape is fucking awesome. The album has such a warm, rich sound to it, which makes it all the more immersive. It's just a nice, pleasant, and accessible experience. Maybe not spectacular, maybe not mind-blowing, but I don't think it's trying to be. I think it just wants to be nice. And in a world being currently ravaged by COVID-19 and the very real possibility of war with Russia, I think right now, nice is more than enough for me. Like, I could bitch and moan about Blood Incantation not giving me a bunch of blast beats and guitar solos if I really wanted to, but I don't want to. I would say that if I were in Blood Incantation shoes, I would maybe have released a more atypical death metal EP or even a couple of singles alongside this album to calm the nerves of angry death metal man-children, but irregardless, it's not going to change the fact that I was not really missing death metal per se on Timewave Zero. I do not think adding big guitar parts and blast beats and gutturals to this album would make it better. I'm going to give Timewave Zero a very enthusiastic 3 out of 5. There's nothing on this album that would change your mind if you hated ambient music or you were just severely uninterested, but for people who are just looking for something, as I said, that is nice, that is accessible, that is pleasant, that they can enjoy while stargazing or getting stoned in a planetarium, I applaud Blood Incantation for going in a new direction, for taking what was previously an additional element to their sound and expanding it into something new and different. And I look forward to seeing in the future not only how this sound develops and evolves, but also how potentially it could be infused directly with the more typical sci-fi cosmic death metal that has made Blood Incantation famous. So yeah, 3 to 5, it's pretty decent. Check it out. I enjoyed it. Yeah. There you go. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.